I'm Ashley Webster.
I'm Kennedy.
I'm Jason Chaffetz, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, September 3rd, 2021. I'm Lisa Brady. 1 week from tomorrow, the nation will mark 20 years since the 9/11 attacks. A new documentary opens a different window to that day. It's called The Lost Calls of 9/11.
They were all there. They were just across the street, so they had a way out. And I think toward the end of the show, it gets very deep and very personal. But what they saw and what they heard is something they cannot erase.
We speak with the host, Fox's Bill Hemmer.
I'm Chris Foster. Anyone helping women get an abortion in Texas can now be sued for $10,000, and there could be more restrictions approved by the Supreme Court down the road.
Abortion is still protected under Roe v. Wade. You could certainly see this court, which is now 6-3 conservative, voting to maybe not to repeal Roe v. Wade, but certainly to cut away at it and cut away at the protections in the first trimester.
We speak with Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace.
And I'm KT McFarland. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
It's almost time for the bells to toll and the names to be read to honor the dead and the heroes from September 11th, 2001.
I saw people running on fire through the streets. I saw people diving out of it. People are diving out of the World Trade Center.
And what you're hearing now is something that hasn't been heard before. Recorded phone calls on a trading floor across the street from the World Trade Center. Fox's Bill Hemmer explains what they are and how they were found in The Lost Calls of 9/11, which airs Sunday for the first time on Fox News Channel.
In this new documentary that we're putting out, one thing that caught my eye, there's a newspaper headline from the New York Times, and to paraphrase, it says, President Bush tells the military to get ready. So that was the beginning for the war on terror. That was the beginning of our original footprint in Afghanistan.
Hemmer is co-anchor of America's Newsroom and also host of the Hemmer Time podcast.
Now with the events of this past week and the suicide bombing that took 13 of our servicemen and women, I think it's more profound than ever because, yes, we'll be thinking about the last 20 years as we think about the last 20 days. That's where the conversation's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that this year's solemn ceremonies, this time marking 20 years since the 9/11 attacks, will be overshadowed at all by what has just happened in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I guess my feeling is that we're going to ask ourselves, what did we get from it? Or what did we get out of it? And how much better are we? Or how much better are they? And I think you're going to hear a lot of varying opinions on how people choose to answer that, whether they're in the military or ex-military, whether they're in government or ex-government, whether they're in the media, people like me who have covered many of these events for the past 20 years. All this is going to be mixed into the conversation that we as a country will have this coming week.
Always with the thought in mind that what the service members have done at all, levels of the military is certainly worthwhile, no matter what anyone's position is, sort of on the outcome in Afghanistan. But that it's kind of a difficult line that's being walked right now because of the overall debate.
Yeah, I think, the political leadership makes decisions and they tell the military what to do, and the military goes in and completes the mission. That's their job. And I think when they were literally asked to evacuate a country with just a couple days' notice, it appeared that they got the job done and they got a lot of people out, but not nearly as many as we needed to. But that wasn't their decision. Those were decisions that were made by politicians.
I know you and your co-anchor, Dana Perino, have interviewed many people from all angles of the Afghanistan story, veterans, lawmakers, Afghans. If you had to sum all of it up, everything you've heard in those interviews for the past few weeks, what would you tell people?
Wow. I personally have found it to be a very emotional 2.5, 3 weeks. Dana and I were on the air speaking with this gentleman that we'll call by the name of Carl, who's still trying to get out of the country, in fact. And he was there for the bombing at the Abbey Gate, and he described a 5-year-old girl who just died in his arms, and he described U.S. military members who had been, at that time, wounded that he saw. Later, the news got worse. When you hear that in real time, and you think, damn it, we were so close. so close to getting out, and so many families had to suffer on the way out. I just found it to be filled with emotion, and I can only imagine next Friday, September 10th, and next Saturday, September 11th, will be similar.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that kind of hits me with each passing year after 9/11 is that there's always something new, a new perspective from someone's experience, and that is what your special that first airs over the weekend is going to tap into, the lost calls of 9/11. What are these lost calls?
Good question. I think many of the stories we hear from year to year, they're very personal, and they deserve to be told. But this is a story that has yet to be told. The trading floors for different financial firms, they have phone recording machines because they want to make sure that, clients when they call or traders when they call to place a trade, that they don't miss it. Well, this machine was running across the street from the World Trade Center. And although there was significant damage done to the building, the recording machine actually survived. But in the process of reopening the business and the offices, they had moved all the office equipment out of there, basically to a warehouse in Texas. And believe it or not, over the past 20 years, there's a guy who was living in Texas. His name is Rick Harold. He does this kind of as a hobby, and he bought this machine for $300. And he went home and he started listening to it, and he says in our special he knew exactly what it was. And then he had to figure out how to literally splice the audio tape together so that he could complete the conversations that were recorded on this machine. And there are many conversations. The amazing thing to me is that all of these people on that machine are still alive. And the story was go out and find them and let them hear it for the first time 20 years later. That's the story.
Wow. That is chilling. What surprises you the most about these calls, or what stands out to you the most?
I think just the personal nature of them is what strikes me. They were all there. They were just across the street. So they had a way out. And I think toward the end of the show, it gets very deep and very personal. But what they saw and what they heard is something they cannot erase.
Wow. And I mean, I'm wondering if it seemed like anyone had any idea who was responsible or the gravity of what had happened. And I ask that partly because after the attacks, especially in New York, where the Trade Center had already been attacked in 1993, U.S. officials certainly had ideas about who would have done it. But I remember it didn't feel at the time as though al-Qaeda or the Taliban were common knowledge in America, did it?
Yeah. There was, from my memory, only one person publicly who called it out in real time, and that was John Scott here at Fox News. John was very familiar with the terrorist network, the terrorist operation. He had been involved in the 1993 attempt that was partially successful for the World Trade Center. And so John was pretty keen into what Osama bin Laden was all about. And he made the call live on the air. This must be the work of al-Qaeda, I believe is the phrase he used. He was one of, I would say, only two people in the first 15 to 30 minutes of September 11, 2001 who had suggested that. No one in our special said, oh, this is the work of al-Qaeda. But some of them had been there in 1993 for the first bombing, so they were suspicious, but nobody brought it up. I personally was waking up in Atlanta, Georgia that morning. I was working for CNN. I had done a late show the night before the 10 p.m. newscast, and our lead story was, will Michael Jordan come back to the NBA? Will he come out of retirement? And we were hustling, and Lisa, we were getting people on the phone, and we felt really good about what we produced. But we woke up the next morning to a whole different world. And I remember at 8:45, my phone rang and I did not answer it. And my recorder went on at my townhouse in Atlanta. And it was my mother. And she said, Billy, are you up? Turn on the TV. Dear Lord, I think we're under attack.
I wonder now that we're this many years out, are we doing enough to, because with each passing year, there's more people who weren't alive when this happened or were too young to remember. So it's like, are we doing enough and doing it in the right way to teach the younger generations about what happened? What do you think about that?
Great question. I think part of that is on them and part of it's on us. And we do it together, right? That's how you reach an education. My biggest fear, whether it's Al-Qaeda or whether it's ISIS-K or whether it's the Haqqani network, all of these groups, in my view, have a new place for which they can go and find their secret private refuge. And what concerns me about that is, I think it was 2 years ago, ISIS in the Arabian Peninsula is the name of the group that was going by that. This is Sinai, Egypt. And they were able to take an explosive device and put it in the size of a soda can and attach it to the back of an airplane, commercial airplane. And it blew up the engine upon takeoff, and the plane fell from the sky and everybody died. So if they were able to do that in a camp somewhere in Sinai, Egypt, or Yemen, or just across the Red Sea, what can you do when you have complete run of the place at a terror camp in Afghanistan? Well, we understand what Osama bin Laden did southeast of Kandahar at Tarnak Farms. He was there for several years, and they plotted and they planned, and they eventually carried out one of the most devastating attacks anyone will ever see in their lifetime. And my great concern is that ISIS has a new home, or Al-Qaeda has a new home, and they will have free reign to be as devious as their minds can possibly be. And that's what we have to teach the younger generation, and that's what we must take great care in paying attention to from this day forward.
What do you hope people will take away from the lost calls of 9/11?
Well, there's a father here who calls his daughters from downtown to let them know that he's okay. And I bring that up to you because what you'll see is, the relationship that he had with them and they had with him and what's happened to all three since. But just the simple act of a phone call to let loved ones know that you're okay, it's significant, certainly during the attacks of 9/11. But you and I, we do it every day. Friends and family members send a text or make a phone call to let them know that we're okay, and we want to hear that in return. And I think it's one of the more simple things we do in life, but the fact that so many did it at that moment to take care of their family and friends is what really strikes me.
Your special, The Lost Calls of 9/11, airs this Sunday on Fox News Channel, and then it will be streaming on Fox Nation. And Fox's Bill Hemmer, thank you very, very much for your time.
Great to be with you. Thanks for your time, and I hope you check it out.
This is KT McFarland with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
On Wednesday, a law took effect in Texas essentially banning most abortions by allowing private citizens to sue anyone who helps a woman get one after 6 weeks of pregnancy. The Supreme Court allowed it to happen by letting a lower court ruling stand, issuing a decision 5 justices to 4 to let the law stay on the books pending legal challenges. It brought pro-choice protesters to the state capitol in Austin. President Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland say they're exploring legal options to protect abortion rights in Texas. Governor Greg Abbott on Twitter writes, Texas will always defend the right to life.
Clearly, the pro-choice people suffered a big setback this week.
Chris Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday.
The Supreme Court has at least temporarily allowed a Texas law to stand, which says that abortions are illegal after 6 weeks. Now, they were very clever in Texas because instead of this having to be enforced by the Attorney General, basically the enforcement is left up to citizens. That if you think that somebody has cooperated in an abortion, not the woman who gets it, but a doctor, a cab driver driving somebody to the abortion clinic, you can file a civil suit against that person, and if you win, you get your legal costs back and you get $10,000. So the result is that when it went up to the court for a preliminary injunction, you don't enjoin, I didn't realize this until this week, you don't enjoin the law, you enjoin an individual. Normally it would be like the Attorney General of the state. Right. But the Attorney General isn't enforcing this. Citizens are, and it hasn't been enforced yet. So this was purposely done as a way to make it impossible, or make it harder is probably what I should say, to stop the law, block the law. So there'll be a court case on this at some point. But right now, abortions are illegal in Texas after 6 weeks, which is, just according to statistics, long before a lot of women even know they're pregnant.
Yeah, because, I mean, of those 6 weeks, 2 of them are, could be before you could possibly know you're pregnant. Beyond the cleverness of it, the legal cleverness of it, I wonder how messy this could be if it took effect. Now, let's say your neighbor, who you didn't like very much, was pregnant, had a miscarriage, wasn't pregnant anymore. Who's to say you can't just sue somebody for $10,000? I mean, there's a chance this could clog the courts. I don't know what the standard's going to be.
Well, I don't think we do know. This is really a novel theory. It's the first time it's been done where, instead of a local DA or the Attorney General of the state or somebody enforcing the law, it's really put into the hands of John Q. Citizen, and it's not a criminal offense, it's a civil offense. So you're right. I mean, there is the possibility of all kinds of stuff. Clearly, and the court is going to hear a Mississippi law, which doesn't have all of these legal exceptions, but just makes it a lot earlier. I think it's 15 weeks that you can ban an abortion. And viability is generally considered between 22 and 24 weeks, and that's basically the standard now. The courts have said pre-viability, when a fetus could live outside of the mother, abortion is still protected under Roe v. Wade. You could certainly see this court, which is now 6-3 conservative, voting to maybe not to repeal Roe v. Wade, but certainly to cut away at it and cut away at the protections in the first trimester.
Yeah, it was that Mississippi case that people were really looking at. Just suddenly, Texas popped up. It's strikingly how quietly and seemingly quickly this happened. Maybe not if you were really following it in the courts or in Texas, knowing the law was supposed to take effect Wednesday, but suddenly here we are.
Yeah, the only point I guess I would make is, oftentimes the courts decide things not on the constitutionality of the law, but the technicalities and issues of standing and things like that. Sometimes, one side wins or loses on that kind of an issue. For instance, when the Trump electoral issues came to the Supreme Court, they were rejected not on the merits of the Trump election and whether or not there had been fraud. It was a question of standing. Remember when the Texas Attorney General sued for what was happening in Pennsylvania, and the courts threw it out just on that basis. So the Texas case, yes, it now stands, and that's the law in Texas, but they have not, and they very expressly said they have not ruled on the constitutionality of that. The Mississippi will be the first case where they rule on that.
Yeah. I mean, beyond being mad at Texas Republicans, a lot of liberals are retroactively angry again with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg for not retiring in 2013 and letting President Obama replace her with somebody younger when he could. Maybe Hillary Clinton could have done a better job in 2020 making the Supreme Court a campaign issue. Liberals are bringing Senator Susan Collins during the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court confirmation hearing. She said, no, I believe that he's going to stick with precedent. So a lot of liberals are looking at the blame to go around.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I did an interview with Stephen Breyer for a new book he has out, and the interview will be Sunday the 12th. And I talked to him a lot about retirement because the court is now 6-3 Republican-appointed, generally conservative justices versus 3 Democratic, more liberal justices. And there's been a lot of pressure, especially after Ruth Bader Ginsburg on Breyer, who's now 83 years old, retire. You hear people like Amy Klobuchar or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying this because you've got a Democratic president and you've got a Democratic Senate, which would have to do any confirmation. And people remember what Mitch McConnell did with Merrick Garland. So retire now. But he didn't in June, and he's going to serve this whole next term. And he's under a lot of pressure. So I asked him about his decision, and that's called a tease. You'll have to wait and see a week from Sunday what he has to say about it.
Well, in the Senate, let's say California Governor Gavin Newsom loses this recall election coming up, and then so a Republican's in charge, and then let's say something happens to a senator in California who then gets replaced by a Republican, and now the Republicans control the Senate, and it's too late for the Supreme Court.
Well, yes and no. I mean, McConnell has not said, I'm going to block it. I think it would be very hard for him. He did block Merrick Garland, but it was only 8 months till the election. That was a choice of Barack Obama. If let's say this were to happen and you get a Republican senator, or, there are a variety of things. In any state where there's a Republican governor, if a Democratic senator were to pass away, then you're going to have a Republican replacement, and Mitch McConnell, instead of being the minority leader, becomes the majority leader. But I don't know that he can block a Biden appointment for 2+ years.
Right.
8 months was controversial enough. I don't think he could do it if all this were to happen in 2022. But this is the reason Democratic and liberals are so upset, because they see, instead of it being 6-3, it could be 7-2. But, incidentally, the flip side could happen. Obviously, there are some older Republican justices. One of them could retire or pass away, although I don't think any of them are going to retire while Biden is president. And then, the Democrats could flip one of those seats, too. It's one of the reasons, interestingly enough, Breyer, his whole book is called The Authority of Court and the Peril of Politics. And what he says, it's very interesting. He quotes Alexander Hamilton, who said that the Supreme Court has neither purse, the power of money, like the Congress, or sword, the power of enforcement, like the president. So what it really relies on for its authority is public acceptance. And things like, and it's happened both ways, the Senate playing games with the confirmation of presidents, of nominees, is one of the reasons it cuts against the authority of the Supreme Court.
Let's talk about Afghanistan for a minute. President Biden the other day was, for lack of a better word, defiant about his decision to stick with this deadline to pull troops out. There are still American citizens there who want to leave. Some of them have roots there and wanted to stay, or some of them are babies who were brought back there. But there are Americans, and certainly who knows how many Afghan allies who want to leave. And there are Republicans who say the president should be impeached over this.
Well, myself, I think the impeachment is crazy. If we're going to start impeaching people for judgment calls they make about policy, remember, you can argue about the execution of this, but, Donald Trump wanted to get out and, in fact, negotiated a deal with the Taliban, and Mike Pompeo was the first American Secretary of State to actually meet with the Taliban. So, I didn't hear any Republicans calling for impeachment then. I certainly think he's going to pay a heavy political price, in my own opinion. I think he should pay a heavy political price. I think the evacuation was a mess. There were tens of thousands, 100 or so Americans, but tens of thousands of Afghans who stood up with us during the 20 years as translators, as drivers, as cooks, whose lives are very much in danger, and they're still stuck in the country. And it just seems to me we did it backwards, that instead of withdrawing our troops first and then worrying about the equipment and the civilians, we should have gotten the civilians out and then the equipment and then the troops. We did it exactly backwards. And the result is, the line is leave no man behind. That's sort of the American military credo. We got all of our troops out, but we left a lot of Americans and a lot of our allies stuck in a Taliban-ruled Afghanistan.
Of course, we were in Afghanistan for almost 20 years because of the 9/11 attack 20 years ago. Now, you have a new book out next Tuesday, September 7th, called Countdown Bin Laden, about the hunt to find and take bin Laden out.
Yeah, I think, Chris, that this is a particularly timely book now. I certainly didn't write it expecting the Taliban to be back in control, but as bad as we feel, and I can understand why all Americans would feel badly about leaving Americans behind, the fact that on 9/11, 2021, the Taliban will be in charge just as it was on 9/11, 2001. But we did accomplish some very important things in our 20 years there. One was we got bin Laden and degraded al-Qaeda. And the other is that it was such a flawless mission that the intel community and the military and the political community worked together so flawlessly to bring this off, as badly as I think they did to bring off the evacuation. And this book is like my previous book, Countdown 1945, about the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. It's a day-by-day account of, it starts the day that the operatives in the CIA go to see Leon Panetta, who's the CIA director, and say, hey, we have found this compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, and it's the best lead we've had on bin Laden's whereabouts in 10 years. And then through the meetings of the sit room, and then the military planning, and then in the helicopter on the way to Abbottabad, and then with the SEAL, Rob O'Neill, as he climbs up the stairs in the main house and ends up face-to-face with bin Laden. And, there's a lot to be proud of there, and it's a hell of a story. And I promise you, although we all know how it turns out, those last 100 pages, you're going to be on the edge of your seat because it's pretty damned exciting.
Your book about the nuclear bombing Japan, that was really a page-turner, so I'm really looking forward to this one, too.
Well, thank you. And let me just say two things that I think a lot of people may not know. One is when he was in the sit room and after he heard from everybody, and Joe Biden, incidentally, was against the raid to bring down bin Laden, he and the Defense Secretary Gates, Obama said, for all of the back and forth, he said it's basically a 50-50 proposition and no better than that, whether or not bin Laden is even there. And the other thing, which I really didn't know until I started interviewing two of the SEALs, they thought this was a suicide mission. They thought there's no chance we're coming back from this alive. The compound's going to be booby-trapped. There are going to be bodyguards there. Maybe we get bin Laden, but they're going to get us. And they still went ahead with it. It's all I can say is it's a hell of a story.
Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday, author of the upcoming book, Countdown Bin Laden. Chris, good to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm Guy Benson. Join me weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern as we break down the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest newsmakers and guests. Listen live on the Fox News app or get the free podcast at GuyBensonShow.com.
Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
And now, some good news with Tanya J. Powers.
Wedding surprises come in all forms, but one that happened last month was life-changing. Just minutes before Dantes Williams tied the knot with Michelle Burton, he made a proposal of a different sort. He gave heartwarming vows to Abigail and Natalie, Michelle's young daughters, asking them if they'd accept his wish of becoming their legal father. He told Fox News he felt it was important to include them in their wedding ceremony because he's been there in their lives for 7 years. Abigail is 9 and Natalie is 8, and Dantes first met them when they were very small. When Dantes started his proposal, the girls initially looked confused because he hadn't done this at the rehearsal. Then they quickly caught on to what was happening, and the tears started. Dantes had kept the whole thing a secret from everyone, even Michelle, who was surprised but happy. The two got engaged in 2017, originally planning their wedding for 2020, but the pandemic pushed it back a year. As for the moment when he asked the girls if he could be their father, Dantes describes it as priceless. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
A.T. McFarland.
What's on your mind?
Tuesday, President Joe Biden made the most important speech of his presidency. Americans in the world watched as he threw away his one chance to rise above his tragic withdrawal from Afghanistan and bring Americans together after 20 years of war. No one expected him to be Winston Churchill rallying the British after Dunkirk, nor Abraham Lincoln consoling the nation after the slaughter at Gettysburg, nor did anyone expect something like Ronald Reagan's eulogy at the tomb of the unknown soldier a decade after the tragic Vietnam War. But he could have at least been straight with us. Instead of speaking to a nation in pain, President Biden made this speech all about himself. He dodged and weaved and blamed others and even claimed our evacuation from Afghanistan was a great success, while most everyone saw it as an unmitigated disaster. He should have left that kind of speech for another time and place. There will be investigations, finger-pointing, and recriminations in the days ahead. Hopefully, those responsible for how the administration ended the last 20 years of American involvement in Afghanistan will be held responsible and made to account for their actions. But on this day, we needed our president to rise above the petty politics of Washington's swamp and speak directly to the men and women who fought and bled in Afghanistan, and to the Gold Star families whose loved ones gave their lives, and to the world bracing for what will come next in Afghanistan and the region. We needed him to reassure us that their sacrifices were not in vain. The failures in Afghanistan were not of their making, but due to the deliberate and inadvertent mistakes of our senior military and political leaders. We needed President Biden to admit defeat. We failed to build a modern democracy in Afghanistan, and despite our efforts, we failed to destroy Islamic extremism or even al-Qaeda's heirs. We needed him to rise to the power and majesty of his office and confer on our men and women the blessing of a grateful nation. He did not. President Biden may not have intended to, but his remarks personified the failures of 20 years of the war in Afghanistan. Our leaders made mistakes that cost people their lives, but those leaders were never held accountable. They were never straight with us. They cared more about their legacies, their reputations, and their personal popularity than they cared about the American people. The men and women who served in Afghanistan deserved better than this. So did the American people. May the good Lord bless the sacrifices of our men and women who fought, bled, and died in Afghanistan, because our president did not. I am KT McFarland. I was President Trump's first Deputy National Security Advisor, and I'm the author of the book Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Hey, it's Brett Larson, inviting you to download and listen to the new daily Fox on Tech podcast. There's part of a colorful late 90s iMac on Mars. It's an idea that seems a lot like Kickstarter, called Build It. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.